Hello there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's great to be with you on this Thursday, February 3rd, and tonight we're talking about America's adversaries.
Last night's operation took a major terrorist leader off the battlefield.
President Biden says a U.S. raid in Syria killed a leader of ISIS. Reportedly, a number of children were also killed in that raid. We'll get into exactly what happened and consider where the fight against terrorism stands now. U.S. intelligence officials are trying to derail Russia from invading Ukraine again. The latest tactic? Expose the Russian pretext for an attack. Also, a former Chicago policeman convicted of murder is out of prison early. You can share your thoughts on this case just ahead. And you won't see many figure skaters of color at the Winter Olympics. Tonight, we feature a diverse group of skaters who told us why that is. So we've been talking about Russia and Ukraine a lot lately for good reasons, but the Biden administration has also been focused on another threat in the Middle East. Today, President Biden announced that U.S. Special Forces carried out an overnight raid in northwestern Syria, and that raid resulted in the death of ISIS's leader, Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Quraishi.
The United States military forces successfully removed a major terrorist threat to the world, the global leader of ISIS, known as Haji Abdullah. As our troops approached to capture the terrorist, in a final act of desperate cowardness, he, with no regard to the lives of his own family or others in the building, he chose to blow himself up. Last night's operation took a major terrorist leader off the battlefield, and it sent a strong message to terrorists around the world. We will come after you and find you.
The Pentagon has also confirmed at least 3 civilian casualties from this raid, and they include Quraishi's wife and 2 children. No U.S. casualties were reported. Now, it's understandable if ISIS has not been on your mind at all. I mean, the last time may be 2019, when a similar raid killed the former leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Al-Quraishi was named the Caliph after Baghdadi's death. He is also known as Haji Abdullah. And he kept a low profile for his 2 years as leader. That explains why we had not heard much from ISIS lately. But last month, under al-Quraishi, ISIS carried out its biggest attack on Syria since 2019. More than 100 militants attacked a prison in northeastern Syria that was holding its members. The goal was to release them, but the attack killed dozens of people. Syrian Kurdish fighters, backed by the U.S., regained control after a week-long battle. Syria is still an area of interest for U.S. national security. An estimated 900 U.S. troops are stationed across northeastern Syria. They continue to work with Syrian Kurdish fighters who have fought ISIS since 2014. Now, the Biden administration says it was planning this operation for months, part of a continued push to remove ISIS leadership. So what happens next? And how much of a threat is ISIS now? Well, joining us tonight are Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. He's also NBC's Chief International Security and Diplomacy Analyst. And Evan Coleman is co-founder of Flashpoint Intel, and he is an NBC News terrorism analyst. Good to have both of you with us. And Mr. Coleman, I wonder if I might start with you and what you make of this raid as it relates to the fight against ISIS.
Well, look, with all due deference to President Biden, I think it is a victory. There's no doubt. Anytime you take out the leader of ISIS, that is a significant victory. And if what the U.S. military has said is correct, he was playing a direct role in planning some of the latest high-profile attacks that ISIS has carried out, including the attack on that prison up in northeastern Syria. But there's a flip side to that, which is that there's basically no evidence, historical evidence whatsoever, that killing the leaders of these groups does permanent damage to their overseas military operations. And this is particularly true with ISIS because it's fairly decentralized. There's not a lot of reason to believe that ISIS cells in Afghanistan or Nigeria are going to stop doing what they're doing just because of, Abu Ibrahim's no longer with us. The other thing to consider is that something that you hit on, which is that he hasn't really been in power all that long. He only took over in late 2019, so he's only been in place for a little over 2 years. ISIS never released any audio or video recordings of him in any of its propaganda, so he didn't have much of a public persona. And, you said it right. We haven't heard much from ISIS, it's big scale lately, and that's because ISIS hasn't done anything that's huge scale lately. And so he didn't have a huge record to hang his hat on. So if you're asking, is it possible that we might even get someone more capable now in place? It's possible. It's a victory, but we have to temper that with reality.
I hear you on that. And Admiral Stavridis, I think also John Kirby, the Pentagon spokesman, sort of alluded to that in his remarks today about what happens now and the significance of this raid. Here's part of what Press Secretary Kirby said.
We have no doubt that his death will have a blow on ISIS and their potential to conduct future operations. I do want to remind that they are still a threat, and we're not. Nobody's taken a victory lap here. We're going to stay at this. They still remain a threat. They still espouse this extreme ideology and this intent to kill, to maim, to terrorize.
Admiral, could you articulate for us what that threat is from ISIS in its current form today, particularly if it is a threat to the United States, or is it more a threat kind of in Syria and in the Middle East?
Well, first, I think both Evan and John Kirby are correct. There's no more dangerous job in the world than leading a terrorist organization with a huge bounty from the United States, because sooner or later we will find you and kill you. But like any military-styled organization, there are succession plans. There are people in the wings. There are potentially more talented people coming behind. And that's the nature of any organization. So both Evan and John have it right. We ought to celebrate this particular moment, but recognize there's more danger ahead, which brings us to your question, Joshua, which is, I would say, compared to what? So compared to 5 years ago, I'm less concerned about ISIS than I am today. They are not moving with tank columns toward Baghdad. They don't control huge swaths of territory in Syria, in Iraq. We have beaten down their abilities in many ways. We haven't seen a major ISIS-led operation. But here's what I worry about. Kind of think of it like those forest fires out west. Things were really burning and hot kind of 5 years ago. Now it's gone a little bit down to the floor of the forest, but there's still embers there. And we would be foolish to disregard them. We need to keep our guard up. Compared to where we were, however, I'm feeling better about a reduced ISIS threat going forward.
So can we try to knit some of these things together, Evan, particularly, with regards to what the Admiral mentioned in terms of, rolling into Iraq. And by the way, just for those of you who aren't familiar with the region, Syria and Iraq share an east-west border. They're just south of Turkey, and then Afghanistan is further east from Syria. How does ISIS currently, Evan, fit into the larger kind of picture of terror and the fight against terror that we've heard about? I mean, after we left Afghanistan, obviously the concern was the resurgence of the Taliban, what that would mean for the potential for al-Qaeda to find opportunity. Does ISIS fit into that, or is this something different?
It's sort of a mixed bag, and it sort of depends where you're talking about, right? So obviously in Syria right now, in the last 2 months, there's been a major upsurgence in activity by ISIS cells. And certainly since the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan back in August and September, there's been a major upsurgence in ISIS activity, both in Afghanistan and Pakistan. But it's not even. It's not all across the board. If you look at claims of responsibility from ISIS, official claims of responsibility, in Iraq, the number of attacks that they've claimed has actually gone down over the past 6 months significantly. So, it kind of depends what you're talking about. In terms of their overseas threat, ISIS is a bit different than al-Qaeda. It's a bit different than the way it operates. The primary threat that ISIS poses to the U.S. homeland and to other Western countries is through the recruitment of nationals, Western nationals, who are for the most part already here. They're attempting to recruit them online and set them out on kind of lone wolf missions. Some of these people are doing it on their own. Some of them are doing it with deliberate, instigation by ISIS. But that's really how ISIS operates. And the way that ISIS is able to kind of fill that recruitment chain is with publicity. So the more that ISIS kind of fades from the front lines of the newspapers and media, the more difficulty it has in terms of finding new recruits. Now, it's a good news, bad news thing. There's less of them, but they're still there. And it's hard to find these folks because they don't look like a stereotypical terrorist. They look like the opposite of that. They look like the last thing you'd ever imagine. And yet these people are sociopaths and they're bent upon murdering other people. And as I frequently like to say, it doesn't take a PhD to murder somebody. And they're willing to do it one by one if that's what it takes to get headlines.
Admiral Stavridis, I wonder if I could get your reaction to something else that John Kirby said at the Pentagon today with regard to civilian casualties. Watch.
We're willing to take a look, to just examine and make sure that there wasn't any act we might have taken that could have also caused harm to innocents. Right now, the strong indications are that to the degree there's loss of innocent life, it's loss caused by Mr. Abdullah and his lieutenant.
I wonder, Admiral, how we're supposed to regard that in light of some of the concerns over civilian casualties with strikes recently. I mean, there was a strike last August in Afghanistan. The New York Times did some investigating, and then the Pentagon later admitted that the strike was a tragic mistake in the Pentagon's terms, and that killed 10 civilians. How do we view the Pentagon's, frankly, its credibility in talking about the precision, or lack thereof, of these kinds of operations?
Well, I've been involved in countless number of these operations over the years, going back to my time as Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Syria, in the war in Libya. And I'll tell you three things that I think are important for people to understand. Number one, the United States tries desperately to avoid civilian casualties. And compared to any other nation, any other organization conducting combat operations, we have the highest standards, and we always try to follow those. Number two. You
know what, Admiral? I'm very sorry to interrupt you, Admiral. And I know our time is short, but I think I may have conflated something, and I just want to be clear as we wind down the conversation. We were talking about a raid on the ground that killed ISIS's leader, as opposed to a strike from the air. So I don't want to ask an unfairly structured question, and if those are not an apples-to-apples comparison in terms of the nature of those operations, please set me straight. Sorry for interrupting. I just want to make sure that the question is fair.
No, I'm glad you did, Joshua. And whether an operation is conducted from the air or conducted on the ground, the same standards of avoiding collateral damage are applied. And there are many layers to this. They go right to the top. As a four-star officer, I was constantly looking at individual strikes, individual operations on the ground. The standards are very high. The second point is we make mistakes. What we did in Afghanistan during that withdrawal, using a predator strike to take out what turned out to be an innocent man bringing water to his family, reprehensible, terrible. What happened? We acknowledged it. We recognized it. We are tearing apart those scenarios. And if anyone ever has evidence of the United States conducting an operation that causes deaths of innocents, bring it forward, and we will investigate it. And then thirdly, overall, I would put our record against anybody's in terms of this, and we hold ourselves to that high standard. So granted, I have been part of this system for years, but I've been out of it for a number of years. And Joshua, I, for one, am confident in this particular strike, if that's the question. I stand with the Department of Defense and John Kirby. And by the way, the operators who conducted that operation, these are our Tier 1, highest-end SEALs. These are not Rambos. These are individuals who have the kind of ethics and standards. Do we make mistakes? Sure. On this one, I would go with what John Kirby is saying from that podium.
Admiral James Stavridis and Evan Coleman, two of our NBC News analysts. Gentlemen, I appreciate you sharing your insights with us tonight. Thank you both very much. Still to come tonight, someone stole dozens of pistols and semi-automatic shotguns from freight trains near Los Angeles. We'll have the latest on the search for the thieves and for those guns. And later, we'll have your update on the Olympics, hockey, figure skating, your favorite winter sport, curling, and our original report about diversity in skating. We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Robbing trains may sound like something out of the movies, but not far from Hollywood. It's happening for real. And what's getting stolen has some Californians very worried. This week, police arrested 5 people in Torrance. That's about 20 miles south of Los Angeles. The group allegedly broke into a train car late Sunday night. In recent months, thieves have been targeting Union Pacific boxcars in L.A. Since August, police have arrested more than 120 people for these thefts. And the worrisome part? The stolen items include more than 80 guns, brand new. According to the LA Times, only a handful of those guns have been recovered. Joining us now is Officer Christian Baldonado of the California Highway Patrol. Officer Baldonado, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for having me.
I'm sure this investigation involves a lot of different agencies, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But what's your sense of where these investigations stand right now?
Right now, it's ongoing. We know it's a huge problem along our railways, so it's a multi-agency effort between city, county, and state. So working together closely, and hopefully we can find these suspects to stop these crimes from happening.
Why are these trains being targeted? How did these thefts get started?
Well, you know what? I think cargo thievery dates back to the old West. The crime hasn't changed; the times have. So I think with e-commerce and the influx of products being delivered from point A to point B via train, has put itself a target, even more so than others. You can see in the footage below that there's just so much debris along our railways, and it's a sitting target. If there isn't anyone to monitor it or to patrol it, then these suspects will come out and rob these cargo trains.
Yeah, Governor Gavin Newsom was spitting mad about the debris a few weeks ago. He went out, had a news conference along some of the tracks, and was kind of like picking through the track, basically saying that they're filthy and they need to be cleaned up, right away. He also had some strong words for some of the officials who he argued were not doing enough to address these crimes. Here's part of what the governor said.
The county needs to be more supportive of these efforts, more collaborative. We pointed out, as an example, one of the county-owned buildings right behind us that's abandoned, what we can do to secure that, what we can do with the encampments around here, how we can get the fencing fixed here, how we can support the efforts, UP and others, to get more trespassing technology here.
So how do you divide the labor, officer, in terms of who does what? Like, how do the jurisdictions overlap for who's responsible for different parts of what are turning into crime scenes?
I think it's an effort with multiple agencies, and I think we need to bound together. Union Pacific Railroad Police Department has reached out to multiple agencies, including the Highway Patrol, in a joint effort to do this. It's not going to just take one agency. If we can work collaboratively together using shared intelligence and resources, I think we'll get to the bottom of this. I would be upset too if I saw a lot of debris along our railways. You can imagine the end user who's waiting for, let's say, their medical equipment. They're the ones who are really suffering. I think I saw one article say that a lot of the cargo in these these trains were, COVID tests. Imagine the hospital that requires them, or a certain agency that requires these tests. Those are the ones that are really hurting. So, to me, that hurts, and I want to, do our due diligence and make sure that we get to the bottom of this, and that our cargo is protected.
I do want to note, by the way, that there is a lot of finger pointing going on between different agencies who have different jurisdictions for this. Los Angeles' District Attorney George Gascon is blaming some of the Union Pacific Police. He wrote a letter to them that reads in part, quote, that it does little to secure or lock trains and has significantly decreased law enforcement staffing, unquote. We asked for a statement from Union Pacific, and in a statement, it told us, quote, Union Pacific has brought in dozens of Union Pacific special agents from across across our 23-state network throughout 2021 and this year. We also have a positive, long-standing relationship with the Los Angeles Police Department and area law enforcement, and we look forward to working together to ensure that criminals are brought to justice and held accountable, unquote. Officer, how does private security factor into this? It sounds like jurisdictionally, and I know CHP from having lived in California in the past, has to deal with basically every agency in the state of California, right? You're kind of the biggest one in the state, so you have to work with everybody. But does that make it harder when you're working with both governments and companies and private security to try to pull all this investigation together?
You know, you would think so when we have our certain roles, but I've worked with many agencies together collaboratively, and when we have one common goal, and that is to prevent more of these thefts along these cargo trains, everyone kind of jives. Everyone works together and, you know, pulls their best resources in, and they're experts in the field. So yes, we are one of the bigger agencies from border to border, state to state, but with the local city and other county, and you know what, even the local businesses, they will reach out and help, and they're the ones that are actually hit hard as well. So the cleanup effort and, you know, some of their products being stolen. So I think, you know, with all our agencies working together, and as long as we focus on one common goal, we can resolve this.
Let me give you a chance before we have to wrap up this conversation to just try to move the investigation forward. Are there particular parts of the state, aspects of the investigation where the gaps are the biggest right now that you would like the public's help with?
You know what? Absolutely. If you see something, please say something. You know, with a lot of people stealing these products, I think what they're doing is reselling it. So if you buy something worth, you know, a couple $1,000s, you buy it for like $100, you got to question where it came from. So we need the public's help for sure. Call your local police department, let them know that you have some intelligence. It could be anonymous, whatever the case is. And with all these leads coming in, we can filter through it and hopefully nab these guys.
And are there certain regions of the state? Are you mostly looking at Southern California, the Inland Empire, the Central Valley? Like, are there certain parts of California that you're focused on?
No, not so much. I think because I represent Southern Division of LA County and where this latest cargo thievery has happened, I think that's our focus. But any intel from not just California, across the state, we welcome it.
I certainly hope you make progress on this very soon. There's going to be a big influx of people into Southern California very soon for the Super Bowl. And hopefully that won't allow more of these stolen goods, especially the guns, to get any further than they have so far. CHP Officer Christian Baldonado, I appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Appreciate you.
Up next, we will shift from crime on trains to crime on the streets. President Biden spent the day in New York City to address gun violence. Plus, snow and freezing rain are drenching states from Texas to Maine. We'll have the weekend forecast when we come back. You know, our show is about sparking conversations around today's biggest issues. But here are a few other stories we think you should know about, too, like the latest on what's happening in Ukraine. U.S. intelligence officials say they are releasing evidence of a Russian disinformation campaign. The idea is apparently to fake a plot in Ukraine to justify another invasion.
One option is the Russian government, we think, is planning to stage a fake attack by Ukrainian military or intelligence forces against Russian sovereign territory. We believe that Russia would produce a very graphic propaganda video, which would include corpses and actors that would be depicting mourners and images of destroyed locations, as well as military equipment at the hands of Ukraine.
This is the latest effort to prevent Vladimir Putin from ordering an attack. Meanwhile, today, U.S. troops began deploying from Fort Bragg in North Carolina to Eastern Europe. Tonight in Chicago, the former policeman convicted of killing a black teenager is out of prison early, very early. Today, Jason Van Dyke was released. He had served less than half of his sentence. Mr. Van Dyke was convicted of second-degree murder and aggravated battery for shooting Laquan McDonald back in 2014. That case turned on the court-ordered release of this dash cam video. Laquan McDonald was 17 at the time. The video shows him armed with a knife walking away. That is when Jason Van Dyke shot him 16 times. He was sentenced to 6 years and 9 months. Today's release came after serving about 3 years and 4 months, and that has local activists demanding action.
We live it. I think on behalf of the community, particularly the black community, we live it. Former U.S. Attorney Zach Farden opened up an investigation, a criminal civil rights probe into the shooting of Laquan McDonald. Since then, nothing has materialized at all. So we're demanding U.S. Attorney John Losh to step up and do something.
Now, we're going to pick up this story tomorrow with Keena Collins. She has been a vocal activist against police violence in Chicago, and she's also running for Congress. And we'd also love to hear from you. What would you like to see happen now and why? And if you are in or from Chicago, we definitely want to know what's on your mind with this case. So tell us. We are at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. You can leave us a voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. That's 888-575-2622. Or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Policing was on President Biden's mind today in a different way. He made a quick visit to New York City, meeting with Mayor Eric Adams to discuss gun violence.
The answer is not to abandon our streets. That's not the answer. The answer is to come together, the police and communities, building trust and making us all safer. The answer is not to defund the police. It's to give you the tools, the training, the funding to be partners, to be protectors, and community needs you and know the community.
The NYPD says that so far this year, major crimes are up 38% from last year. Mayor Adams is a police veteran, and he says that he and the president are in agreement on making our cities safer.
Let's stop being divisive and united to come together and deal with this fight. We are on the same page. There is a reason they call me the Biden of Brooklyn. That's what New Yorkers want too.
New York is just one place in the path of yet another weekend winter storm. So is Texas, nearly a year after a deadly ice storm damaged that state's power grid. Today, thousands of Texans were without power as freezing rain and sleet swept through. This winter storm system stretches from New Mexico to Maine. So who's in for the worst of it? Let's get the forecast from NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns. Hey, Bill.
Joshua, we've seen it all today, from an ice storm to a snowstorm, flooding conditions, and unfortunately, severe weather with a tornado. And we do have a report of one fatality from that tornado in Hale County, Alabama. 8 injuries, and of those 8 injuries, 3 are being reported as critical. So let me show you on the maps here. The area of concern is diminishing with the tornado threat, but at the storm that caused the fatalities and the damage just north of Denapolis in Sawyerville, Alabama, one home, the top of it was completely removed. Other mobile homes were also knocked off their foundation. And as far as what we're going to deal with the rest of this evening, we are watching these watches and warnings. They do still have over 1 million people included in them, from Oklahoma and Texas all the way through northern New England. The ice storm, though, is of greatest concern. That's going to continue overnight in Kentucky, moving into areas of West Virginia towards morning, and that freezing rain will be in Pennsylvania and Hudson Valley, right through central New England tomorrow morning during the rush hour. So it'll be very treacherous, and then temperatures actually get colder during the day around New York City and Long Island in southern New England, so we could see some icing problems even there. As far as the ice accumulations go, you need about a 1/4 of an inch to have tree branches break and power outages. So anywhere in the blue, from Pittsburgh to State College, Scranton to Albany, Kingston, Poughkeepsie, Springfield, Mass. to Boston to Portland, Maine, those are the areas that we're most concerned with the potential for freezing rain and high sleet accumulations. If you want snow, you really have to go to western New York, central New York, or northern New England. That's where we easily could see a foot of snow in the mountains, maybe even 1.5 feet. So great for skiing this upcoming weekend. And those areas can deal with it, Joshua. They're used to it, and they have the plows and the equipment to deal with it. But in Texas, the big question is, how will the power grid respond to the 2 coldest mornings of the winter? And we do still have a little bit of freezing rain even around the Houston area, and Houston public schools are closed. We have wind chill advisories that are up, wind chill warnings in a few areas, and the temperatures tomorrow morning will be in the teens in North Texas and then the 20s all the way down to the Gulf Coast. So Joshua, we'll find out tomorrow morning if they made those necessary changes to keep power on for everyone in Texas. We all know what happened last year. Back to you.
Yeah, indeed we do. Thank you, Bill. That's NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns with the forecast. Coming up, we head to the snowy mountains of China for an Olympic update. We're live in Beijing with Team USA's wins and losses. Next. The United States is not sending a diplomatic delegation to the Beijing Olympics. Still, the White House is lit up for the official start of the Winter Games tomorrow. You see it there in beautiful red, white, and blue on the north face of the White House, on the North Lawn. Some competitions have already started, though, in Beijing, and there's good news and bad news for Team USA fans. First, the bad news. The U.S. curling team suffered a setback this morning. They lost to Norway 11-6. And the good news is mixed with some bad fortune. The U.S. women's hockey team is advancing after beating Finland 5-2, but the team lost its star player. A leg injury knocked Brianna Decker out for the rest of the tournament. The Winter Games are well underway, but the opening ceremonies are tomorrow. China's President Xi Jinping plans to attend. U.S. officials will not because of that diplomatic boycott. You can watch the ceremonies live on NBC and Peacock, which, like this network, are both owned by NBC Universal. NBC's Steve Patterson is at the Olympics in Beijing with more. And Steve, let's start with women's hockey. That's a real bad break for the team, even though they're advancing.
Even though they're advancing, and they won that game 5-2 over Finland, and they looked fairly dominant, but you have to say that this is a far bigger loss overall. Brianna Decker was an alternate captain and a 10-time world champion, 3-time Olympian. So you're talking about the loss of firepower and the loss of leadership on that team. And the way it went down was so heartbreaking. We're talking about the first 10 minutes of their first game. She's trained all year for this, performed all year for this, and in the first 10 minutes, she gets tangled with another player on the opposite team, goes down, gets pulled off on a stretcher. I'm told from inside that auditorium, obviously you can hear more because there are less people inside of there, that the screams were audible. So just a horrific situation for herself and the team, yet the team still performed well. They still look great, and they're hoping to go up against their rival Canada as they progress throughout the games. Joshua.
Goodness, that just sounds horrifying. Hopefully that won't rattle them as they make their way further into the tournament. With regard to curling, Team USA, we mentioned, lost their latest match. Is this the end of the road for the U.S. curlers, or are there more matches yet to go? Where do they stand?
Curling, your new favorite Olympic sport, Josh. So I'm glad we're talking about it. Yeah, I mean, look, there are expectations for the United States, for teams like the U.S., Canada. They perform typically well in the sport, and they've been dropping games. The first game, they beat Australia, but it was 6-5. That was closer than a lot of people would have predicted. And then the last two games against Italy and another one were just complete drops. Now, obviously, it's very, very early. It's before the opening ceremony has even started, and we're talking about one sport within the discipline. We're talking right now about just mixed curling, so men and women together. When the women get together separately and the men get together separately, it could be far different. So there's still so much more curling, as I know you're excited about, to go. Josh.
Oh, of course. That's the only reason I tune in. With regard to the opening ceremony, China's President Xi, we mentioned, will be at the opening ceremony. A lot of nations will not have delegations there. Take a look at this list of the countries who have announced they will not be sending their leaders. Of course, the U.S., but also Canada, Australia, the U.K., Japan, Germany, Estonia, Sweden, Switzerland, Austria, Slovenia, Belgium, and others. There is a real undercurrent of diplomatic tension under some of the games, and Russia says that it is going, and President Putin plans to meet with President Xi while he is in China. So underneath all of this, Steve, I wonder how just the diplomatic drama is playing out so far. Has it kind of yet to bubble up?
Well, I think it's important to explain what this is and what this isn't for viewers at home. What this is, as you mentioned, a diplomatic boycott. So you'll have members of cabinet or parliament from each of these countries that you just won't see at the opening ceremony. And as far as from a viewer perspective, that's about it. What this is not is a full boycott. So athletes, of course, will still participate. Fans are expected to cheer on for, their home country and their favorite athletes. And certainly sponsors have been mute on this. They're going to make their money, and they're not pulling out whatsoever. So this will not have a huge impact on the games overall. What it will impact, though, is, as you mentioned, sort of the geopolitical situation of these countries, positioning and posturing. China has already alluded to ramifications from the boycott. What that will look like, I don't think we will know anytime soon. We may not know at all, as it's sort of a tit for tat. What it may lead to, though, is in, diplomatic situations where the U.S. has to work with China or these other countries, it may lead to, forcing China's hand to do something, or China, bowing out of something that they promised to do, like, let's say, working together on climate change. That may be a thing as well. And the last thing I want to say is that there is an impact from this for viewers at home if these broadcasters from around the world choose to talk about things like relations with Hong Kong or Tibet or the Uyghur situation here in China. If they choose to talk about it and more people are enlightened and more people have more information about it, I think that's a win for people that were protesting the games in the first place. Josh?
And briefly, Steve, before I got to let you go, do we have any idea of what to expect at the opening ceremony? We remember the opening ceremonies from 2008 in Beijing. And yesterday, I think I misspoke and said 2006. It was 2008. But those opening ceremonies kind of blew everybody's hair back. Do we have any preview of what we can expect tomorrow?
It's mostly under wraps. We know China's penchant for spectacle. That was proven in 2008. We know it's going to be shorter and a little bit more streamed down. Maybe about an hour and a half, where that last one was for hours. Just to give you a frame of reference, in 2008, there were 2,000 drummers alone. We're talking about just people drumming. This year, there's only going to be about 3,000 performers in total. So obviously, expect a lot less, but also still expect that spectacle. There is no doubt that China can surprise us in just a few hours. Josh?
Speaking of spectacle, Steve, we're going to have to think of some more things to do in these conversations, because they made an animated GIF of me doing my little curling impression yesterday that seemed to just kind of set the team on fire. So you and I are going to have to figure out ways to keep, peppering in, just keep it spicy between the two of us. But we will discuss offline. Thank you, Steve.
I think it's a daily curling conversation, Joshua. I think that's you and me for sure.
Curling is the gift that keeps giving. That's NBC Steve Patterson for us in Beijing. Thank you, Steve. Now, we will focus on figure skating in just a moment. Specifically, its lack of diversity. A group of skaters of color shares their story, and the top diversity official at U.S. figure skating joins us before we go. Olympic figure skating begins tonight. The first event is the men's short program. For Team USA, all eyes are on 22-year-old Nathan Chen. He hopes to win the U.S. its first gold medal in single skating in more than a decade. Nathan Chen has won the last 3 world titles. He won bronze at the Winter Games in 2018. On the women's side, the U.S. has now gone 3 Winter Olympics without a medal. That is its longest drought ever. And there's something new at U.S. skating this year, or rather someone new, a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You'll meet her in just a moment. But what is the situation with diversity in figure skating? Let's hear from skaters of color in their own words, from a former Olympian and world champion to youngsters just starting out and the long-suffering parents who support them. They told us this sport can be both exclusive and expensive.
On my 13th birthday, I signed up for lessons at a mall. That's very late. Most people, they start 3, 4, 5, especially ones with skating parents. I was the one who picked it up faster than my friends. They were still falling over.
And I saw that Michael loved it. I couldn't get him off that rink for anything. And the coach says, he really has some talent. Did you see how he jumped? Did you see he did a triple? He's only been skating for 3 years. Some of the background that he needed, like the ballet, he never had that.
I mean, my jumps sometimes don't work on days, but I just tried and come back and do better.
He has to work harder. He has to try harder. He just has to put in that extra work.
I was in preschool. I got tickets to a Disney on Ice show. I saw it and I told my mom that's what I want to do. A lot of it came down to me. I started taking the train by myself when I was in like 4th grade. A lot of these kids who are able to reach like that very high level, their whole life revolves around skating.
None of them look like me, though. I'm the only minority figure skater, so. There are subtle things, light forms of racism that I've experienced before.
I would say I still love skating, but I hate the people. There's no black kids, and if they are, like, it's very few.
I always say to myself, I'm a figure skater just like them. The only thing is the color of my skin.
I find that it's an elitist sport. You're not welcomed by some of the parents. We don't look like them. I work, they don't work. You know, I'm driving in with my beat up car. They have their BMW. And sometimes he felt bad because he would say, Mommy, why don't you just drop me here? And I knew exactly why he was doing it.
I would think the main reason that if I ever felt I wanted to quit would be the financial cost.
It's about $35,000 a year. That's just coaching.
A moves coach and a spin coach.
A choreographer.
And then I also had my head coaches with 2 people.
You need to have a costume.
2 costumes, both were around $1,600. My boots, I had a special order from Italy.
It's like $800 just for the boot, not the blade.
I know my blades cost around like $1,300.
Ice time here for 40 days is $340 a month.
I have lessons almost every day.
$120 to $160.
If it's a competition, you got to pay for the competition and the coach's time. Just the application fee was $250. For the application fee, you got to get the costume, you got to pay the coach, and you got to travel. How many people can afford that?
Figure skating always was seen as an East Coast upper-class sport. Clubs in Boston and Philadelphia and New York were very prominent. A lot of them were exclusionary clubs. Exclusionary of Jews, they were exclusionary of blacks, they were exclusionary of a lot of other people.
It started with Mabel Fairbanks. She was this beautiful black woman in a skating rink with the majority of people in it were white.
Well, she was really the great pioneer among black women in the United States. She was of mixed race. Her father was black and her mother was a Native American. She was born in Florida in 1915, but moved to New York City after she was orphaned at a very young age. I mean, she was denied access to rinks. She certainly could not join any clubs, but she skated professionally for about 10 years in the New York City area and later became a very prominent coach. Among the skaters she coached, many are well known. Ty Babylonia, Tiffany Chin.
Atoy Wilson, he started with Mabel.
Christy Yamaguchi, Debbie Thomas.
Mabel is the woman who paved the way for skaters of all color. I didn't know I was the first multiracial figure skater. And it probably helped that Randy and I were, we were good. We were champions. We worked hard and we climbed up the ranks. Something that Mabel taught me and her other students is because of our skin color, you'll have to jump higher, spin faster, and shine brighter because you look a little different from the other skaters.
If it's not in the rink, it's going to be in the workplace. If it's not in the workplace, it's just in life. The bottom line was, how much do you want this? Are you willing to fight for it?
My love for the sport keeps me going. I get up every day, I come here, practice, and try to give it my all, even if I am having a bad day. I think to myself, I'll come tomorrow and do it better.
A lot of people, they talk about being social justice warriors and making a difference, but they're not really making a difference.
What is the sport going to do? What are you going to do to protect your black skaters? What are you going to do? Are you going to educate the coaches about the discrimination and the unintentional racism that they exhibit?
Why can't it happen? Make a difference. I'm so tired of the talk. I want to see some action. I want to see some brown faces on the ice. Make it more accessible.
Thanks to our producer Sean Crowley and our photographer and editor David Hall for that report. Let's continue now with Kadari Taylor-Watson. She is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for U.S. Figure Skating. Welcome to the program. Glad you're with us.
Thank you, Joshua. Nice to be here. I am very excited.
Could I just get your general reaction to the story we just heard, particularly Olivia Alexander, who said that she loves the sport but hates the people?
Yeah, you know what, Joshua, it's not something that surprises me because I do know that we do have issues with people feeling like they are on the outskirts of the sport because of the institutionalized racism that has been part of the sport since it began. And I think that's the reason that we are focused so much on education as part of the work that we're doing at U.S. Figure Skating currently.
I think that some DEI initiatives are amazing and they're effective, and others are basically just a way to satisfy investors, put on a good face, and avoid lawsuits. You know what I'm saying? Like, it depends on the devil is really in the details of DEI. Talk about what you plan to do with U.S. figure skating to make it not just a feel-good, goodwill initiative. Like, where's the work being done to make real change?
I mean, I really appreciate that question because I think one of the issues in DEI work in general is that we make sure that we're not being performative, making sure that there are actual institutional changes in the organization. And also that includes not hiring one person and expecting them to do all the work. It also means that we have to audit and adjust our practices, our processes, and our policies from an equity lens. And so some of the things that we're going to be doing, for one, is educate our members in understanding what type of people we need for the organization to thrive. I talk a lot about humanizing DEI. And so to me, that means that the most important asset of any organization are its people. And so when we think about the people we need to make our DEI goals achieve them, we need people who are ready to have courageous conversations about hard topics, knowing that those hard topics can have a positive impact not only on the individual, but the organization. We also need people who are culturally aware and are willing to challenge their own ideologies about what's normal and to confront their biases, you know, from the judges to the coaches to just the members in the sport in general. And finally, we need people in leadership positions that acknowledge that it's going to take accountability to transform this 100-year organization into the next 100 years so that it's an organization that we can all be proud of.
We asked some of our viewers about diversity, equity, and inclusion in skating. Thanks to those of you who sent in some responses. At Curious Big wrote, does that include those with invisible disabilities as well? And Kim writes, I'm an adult figure skater. We are very inclusive. I wonder, what about that? How you're defining DEI? I think often when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we mean race, which is a piece of it, but then, you know, different physically abled people, that's another form of diversity as well. How are you defining that term?
So when we talk about representation and visibility in our sport, oftentimes in my training, I ask people, you know, when you think of a figure skater, what comes to mind? And most often the response that you get is a young girl who is usually white, thin, and some people might refer to her as the ice queen. And so our goal at U.S. Figure Skating is to share that skating is for everyone. And this includes recognizing that we have to rethink who we put on the pedestal in our sport and make visible different body types, people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds and ages, so that we can look more like how America looks.
How much of this do you think is a pipeline issue? I mean, U.S. figure skating memberships have dropped off in the last few years, and one of the things you said that you're going to look at is data on membership. Where do you go first? Before I got to let you go, where do you go first in terms of remaking the pipelines that more skaters of color might someday come through?
That's a great question. I mean, we definitely have to develop our pipelines, and we do have diverse skaters throughout the sport. It's just that they're not able to matriculate into these higher positions as judges, as coaches, and that is something that our data is going to be able to help us understand why. We are looking for a data consultant to help us collect data to understand why our climate is the way that it is, and to get that reliable data that shares how we can do better in terms of creating best practices for hiring and creating that pipeline for coaches, for officials, and being more transparent in the way that we're doing things.
Before I got to let you go, if someone sees this, you know, a skater who doesn't necessarily see themselves reflected and thinks, okay, I might want to try this. I might give this a shot. I don't know nobody like me who's doing this, but I'm going to go for it. What's the one biggest piece of advice you would have for them before we go?
Skating is for you. Please come to our sport and be your most authentic self. And we are working to change the culture to be welcoming and to be inclusive and to foster a sense of belonging for anyone who shows up at our rink. And if you would like to continue the conversation, please reach out to me. My information is on the website, and I welcome to continue the conversation.
I appreciate the work that you're trying to do. Visibility matters. It's great to have had those young people's stories tonight, and I appreciate hearing what more is going to be done to encourage more young people like them. Kadari Taylor-Watson, I appreciate you making time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you too, Josh.
And thank you for making time for us tonight. Remember to come on back tomorrow when we'll be talking about gun violence in Chicago. Activist and congressional candidate Keena Collins joins us. Share your thoughts on what should happen now and why, especially if you're in Chicago. We are at NBC Now tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. Leave us a voicemail or leave us an email. We'd love to hear from you. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.